Ma'am, this is your final warning. Either pack up and leave this cabin or I'm calling the police. Karen's voice tore through the calm morning air like static on a broken radio. She stood rigid at the edge of the gravel path that wound down to my serene lakeside cabin, brandishing a clipboard like it was some sort of law enforcement badge. Her lips were pinched with fury, and her overly curled hair bounced with every word she spat, pointing to a wrinkled notice stamped boldly with violation in red ink. I didn't budge. I was settled comfortably in my porch chair, sipping freshly brewed black coffee as the steam rose gently from the mug. The lake shimmered beneath the early sunlight, birds sang their usual tune, and Rusty, my aging retriever, lay snoozing by my feet. This woman, this complete stranger wearing a name tag that read Karen P. HOA President, had just barged into my sanctuary, acting like she owned the entire world. "I'm not going anywhere," I said, steady and calm. She scoffed. "Then I'm calling 911, you're trespassing on community land." I looked at her quietly and allowed myself a small smile. She had no idea that I owned not just this cabin, but the entire lake, the forest behind it, the trails her prissy little poodle pranced along. She didn't even know I owned half the county. But I kept quiet. I wanted to see just how deep she'd dig her hole. Then, with a dramatic flair, she whipped out her phone and called 911. I took a slow sip from my mug. My heart wasn't racing from fear, it was beating with anticipation. This was about to get real interesting. And just as the emergency operator picked up, Karen shouted, "Yes, I need officers at Lakeside Lot 42. There's a squatter here refusing to leave." At that very moment, I heard tires crunching on gravel behind the cabin. That sound only meant one thing. Buck had arrived in his old green Ford. Karen hadn't noticed yet, but when she did, well, what happened next was something you'd have to see to believe. Before I explain how everything unfolded, let me take you back to how it all began long before Karen, long before the police call, and before I became the legal owner of this entire stretch of land. You'll see how one simple act of kindness, a little patience, and a lot of land ownership led to a clash nobody could have predicted. But before we dive deeper, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop a comment. I'm curious if HOA drama like this ever explodes in your area, too. Now, let me properly introduce myself. My name's Jack Mitchell. I'm 61, retired, and living in a humble lakeside cabin near Echo Pines, a town of fewer than 4,000 people. You probably haven't heard of me, and you won't find my name in the news or online. But if you've ever lived in a small American town, you've likely met someone like me. I'm quiet, keep to myself, and know the story behind every rock and pine tree. I used to be a civil engineer, spent 35 years building highways and bridges across the state. While others chased city lights and fast money, I saved every penny I earned. And 10 years ago, I bought this land, and not just the cabin, but over 1,300 acres of forest, lakefront, hiking trails, and even part of the very neighborhood Karen now claims to manage. She had no clue, though. Most of the property was listed under a private trust. It kept things peaceful, a broken bar, until now. Honestly, I never thought I'd butt heads with the HOA. I wasn't even part of their neighborhood. My land just bordered it. Over time, they started using my rails and fishing in my lake, acting like it belonged to them. I didn't mind. People were enjoying the spacey of fishing, walking, watching the sunrise. I thought, why not? Kindness doesn't cost a thing. That all changed when Karen took over as HOA president last spring. She went on a power trip, put up signs reading private use only and home members only. Then came the gates erected right across trails that cut through my land. Still, I let it go, figured she'd ease up. But this past weekend, that was the last straw. I had just gotten back from visiting my daughter in Texas, and waiting for me were flyers shoved in my mailbox, plastered on my truck, even pinned to Rusty's doghouse. Every one of them said the same thing: this property is not zoned for cabin use. Vacate immediately or face fines. Apparently, my cabin was listed as an abandoned structure in their HOA reports. I couldn't help but laugh. They didn't even have jurisdiction over me. So I did the one thing Karen wasn't prepared for. I stayed. Rusty's been around a long time. When I built this cabin myself years ago, he was right there, tail wagging. These days, He's slower, his joints stiff like mine, but his instincts still sharp. The moment Karen stomped down that gravel path, Rusty perked up. He smelled the trouble before I even did. And she didn't come alone. Trailing behind her were two other HOA board members, Derek and Marin. Derek looked jumpy in tight jeans, constantly glancing back at the golf cart they rolled up in. Marin, on the other hand, looked like she regretted agreeing to come along. "Jack Mitchell," Karen barked, "you've ignored all our notices." "I don't answer to the HOA," I replied. "Well, you will," she snapped, flipping pages on her clipboard. "According to HOA Code 422, unauthorized cabins on association recreational property must be vacated or torn down." "You're really sure this is HOA property?" I asked, my voice steady. "It's marked that way on our official map," she said with smug certainty. I took another sip of coffee. They had no idea. Karen stepped in close, her tone low and threatening. "So, what's it going to be? Leave quietly or deal with the consequences?" "I'm not going anywhere," I repeated, and that's when she pulled out her phone and made the call. Right then, Buck's truck rolled up. But Buck, he's more than just the guy who keeps the land clean. Buck wasn't just my groundskeeper, he was a seasoned land surveyor with more years walking this terrain than the HOA had homes. He stepped out of his truck slowly, sunglasses hiding his eyes, and gave a long whistle that sliced through the tension. "Well now," he said, voice low and amused. "What do we have here?" Karen spun around, startled. "This man is trespassing," she snapped. "We've already called the authorities." Buck glanced at me, then at Rusty lying at my feet, then back to her. "Ma'am," he said plainly, "you might want to hold off on that call." Karen blinked in confusion. "Excuse me?" Without a word, Buck reached into his truck and pulled out a thick binder bulging with survey maps, property deeds, zoning records, and legal documents. "I think there's been a mix-up," he said. "This cabin, this lake, this land, it's not part of your HOA. Never has been." Karen's jaw dropped, but before she could speak, the wail of sirens echoed down the hill. Red and blue lights danced through the trees as two sheriff's cruisers pulled up in a hurry. A deputy stepped out, scanning the scene. "Is there an issue here?" Karen rushed forward, finger pointing at me like a weapon. "Yes, this man is a squatter. He's refusing to leave our community's recreational cabin." The deputy turned toward me. "Sir, do you have identification?" I nodded and reached for my wallet, but Buck stepped forward first, handing over the binder. "Deputy," he said calmly, "this cabin has been standing for 22 years. Mr. Mitchell owns it and the land around it. In fact, he owns 1,346 acres of this county." He paused and fixed Karen with a look. "Including the road you just drove in on." The deputy flipped through the binder, brows lifting as he read. Karen stumbled back a step. Derek whispered a stunned, "Oh, number." Marin actually gasped out loud. The deputy looked up from the papers. "Ma'am," he said, voice steady, "you're the one trespassing." And right then, Karen collapsed straight onto the gravel, flat on her back. That moment changed everything. But believe me, it was only the beginning. What followed would send shockwaves through the entire community and far beyond. The sound of Karen hitting the gravel was somehow louder than the sirens that had announced the deputy's arrival. Marin screamed. Derek stood frozen, mouth hanging open. The deputy, a tall man with tired eyes and a calm manner, crouched beside her and checked her pulse. "She's breathing," he said after a second. "Just passed out cold." Most likely, it was the realization that she'd called 911 on the owner of the road she'd used to get there. "Someone bring her some water," he muttered. Buck leaned back against his truck, arms crossed, a smug grin tugging at the corners of his mouth. Rusty wagged his tail as if this were all just part of a normal morning. I knelt down beside Karen. Her clipboard was still clutched tightly in her hand, the paper labeled violation trembling ever so slightly in her grip, but even unconscious. "She'll be fine," the deputy said after checking her over again. Then he looked up at me. "But I'll need to ask you a few questions, Mr. Mitchell." I gave him a nod. Derek finally found his voice. "Wait a second, there has to be some kind of mistake," he said. "That land is on our home map. We have paperwork." Buck let out a dry chuckle. "Son, your paperwork looks like it was drawn with crayons compared to this," he said, Patting the binder, the deputy flipped to another page. "This deed is official," he said. "Stamped and signed by the county clerk over 2 decades ago. Looks like the Mitchell Trust purchased over 1,300 acres of this cabin, the lake, the road, and even part of the hillside leading into your neighborhood." Derek stared like someone had just told him the sky wasn't real. Boot to broken bar. Karen said the cabin was unsafe. That it was part of the shared whole land. Buck snorted. "Wrong again." Karen groaned and blinked up at the sky, dazed. "Where you broken bar? Where am I?" She mumbled. "You're still trespassing, ma'am," the deputy replied gently. "You passed out after learning this land isn't part of your HOA." She sat up slowly, brushing dust off her blouse. Her face flushed crimson as her gaze met mine. "You lied to us," she whispered. "I didn't lie," I said, rising to my feet. "You just never asked the right questions." The deputy helped her up and added, "And attempting to evict someone from land you don't own? That's not how the law works." Karen trembled, whether from shame, fury, or both. I couldn't tell. Derek jumped in, desperate to salvage something from the wreckage. "Mr. Mitchell, maybe this is all just a misunderstanding. We've been using the trails and the lake for years. We assumed it was all part of the HOA." I exhaled slowly. I never stopped anyone from enjoying it. No gates, no fences, no signs, just peace. I figured to let folks have the space. Karen stood straighter, trying to regain her dignity. "Then why didn't you attend the HOA meetings? Why not register your lot like everyone else?" "Because I'm not part of your HOA," I said simply. She pointed sharply. "But your driveway runs through our road." I tilted my head. Your road runs through my land." Her knees buckled slightly again, and she had to steady herself. "But let's rewind for a moment. To understand how we got to this point, we need to go back to where it started. It all began last year when Karen took charge of the HOA board. Before her, we had a reasonable guy in charge. His name was Frank. Fair-minded, old school, and he and I, we got along just fine. Frank understood the boundaries. He knew parts of the HOA neighborhood brushed up against my land, but he never tried to enforce their rules outside of their jurisdiction. Then Karen moved in. She bought one of the new builds, a big modern windows, fake turf that always looked too green, a flashy gate with a gold lion-shaped handle, and from the moment she arrived, everything began to change. Longtime residents started receiving citations for ridiculous things: mailboxes not matching the seasonal color scheme, sitting on their porches without matching furniture sets. She turned the HOA Facebook page into a digital war zone, uploading photos of neighbors' lawns with captions like, "We can do better." At first, I ignored it. Wasn't my fight. But then, the signs started showing up. One nailed to my dock read, "Home member fishing only." Another appeared on the trail entrance I personally carved a decade ago, "Private HOA hiking access." I had to laugh. The irony was almost too much. Technically, they were the ones trespassing. Still, I let it slide. Life's too short to throw people off land for simply enjoying nature. But then Karen sent in a contractor, some poor guy with a toolbox and a clipboard, who came to repair my dock. He started replacing the boards like he owned the place. I had to politely but firmly inform him that he was working on private land. He was apologetic and packed up without protest. Karen, on the other hand, doubled down. She filed a formal complaint to the HOA, claiming the dock was an unpermitted structure that endangered the community and violated the visual harmony of HOA standards. That's when I decided enough was enough. I started collecting everything: property records, boundary maps, deed copies, drone footage of the land. Buck helped. So did my lawyer, who'd quietly managed the trust for years behind the scenes. I wasn't looking for a fight. I just wanted to be left alone. But Karen wasn't after peace, she was after control. And control gets embarrassing when it forgets who actually holds the title to the land. Which brings us back to that moment. Karen brushed herself off, wearing a strained smile like a mask. "Well," she said, trying to sound composed, "surely we can come to some sort of agreement." "Like an apology?" I asked. Her smile twitched at the corners. Derek leaned in and whispered something to her, but she ignored him. "I think we should host a community meeting," she said, "to clear up the boundaries. We'll invite the HOA board." "And you, of course." I raised an eyebrow. "You want me to attend a meeting I'm not even part of?" "It's about transparency," she replied. For community harmony. Buck gave a dry chuckle. Harmony's something you only need when things are broken, and you, lady, brought the mess. The deputy stepped in, firm but neutral. As of now, no laws have been broken, but ma'am, I'd highly recommend you and your board double-check your property lines before handing out more of these so-called violations. Karen said nothing, face red. She turned sharply and stomped toward the golf cart. Derek trailed behind her, muttering something about needing a stiff drink. Morin stayed a moment longer. I'm sorry, she said quietly. I had no idea. I really didn't. I nodded. It's all right. Just next time, ask before assuming. As the golf cart disappeared down the road, the deputy turned to me. You really own all this land? The whole area around the community? 1,300 acres. Buck answered. His great-granddad bought most of it before there were even paved roads out here. The deputy let out a low whistle. Well, sir, he said, if you ever think about selling, give me a call first. We laughed. But none of us knew what was coming next. Because Karen wasn't finished. The very next day, something bizarre happened. I was headed into town for groceries, and as I passed the entrance to the Echo Pines neighborhood, I saw a brand new sign going up. It read, "For sale, Lakeside Cabin Retreat. A contact HOA for viewing." They had listed my cabin for sale, without my consent, without even a conversation. I slammed the brakes so hard Rusty jolted forward in the seat, letting out a startled yelp. My eyes locked on the Signa Fresh Wood, bold letters, nailed right into the ground at the entrance of the neighborhood. For sale, Lakeside Cabin Retreat. Contact HOA president for details. In fine print, private showings for approved HOA buyers, cash offers only. My blood boiled so fast I felt heat radiating in my ears. The audacity, the absolute delusion. How could she even try this? After everything that happened the day before? After fainting in front of law enforcement? After being shown legal proof that I owned every square inch? I pulled over, snapped a photo of the sign with my phone, and called Buck. He picked up on the first ring. Tell me I'm hallucinating, I said. You're not, he replied flatly. They showed up early this morning with a drone, measuring tape, and one of those HOA-issued SUVs. I figured you'd want to deal with it yourself. My grip on the steering wheel tightened until my knuckles turned white. I'll be there in 10, I said. We're shutting this down. I spun the truck around and hit the gas. My thoughts raced. Was this revenge? Did Karen truly think she could sell my home right out from under me? Rusty whimpered beside me, already sensing what was coming. As I pulled up to the cabin, there they were, two strangers standing on the dock, a couple, holding hands and pointing at the lake like they were planning out their golden years. The man wore cargo shorts and a grin straight out of a real estate brochure. The woman wore a flowy floral dress and the woman held a real estate flyer in her hand. As I stepped out of the truck, "Can I help you?" I asked, keeping my tone polite. The man turned toward me with a bright, friendly grin. "Yes, actually, we're here for the showing. Saw the listing in the HOA newsletter. Beautiful place you've got here. I assume you're the caretaker?" I didn't flinch. "Nope, I'm the owner." They both froze. The woman glanced back at her flyer, confused. "But it says right here a Lakeside Cabin Retreat, 2-bedroom, 1 bath, full lake access, home managed." Karen said it was a priority listing, a broken bar, something about a foreclosure. She furrowed her brow. She claimed the owner disappeared and stopped paying HOA dues. The man chimed in. "We're thinking about making a cash offer assuming we like the inside." I exhaled slowly and gave them a tight smile. "You might want to hold off on that offer. You're about to witness something far more interesting than a cabin tour." I pulled out my phone and called Buck. "Grab the binder, speakerphone, and your fishing chair. Meet me down at the dock." Less than 15 minutes later, Buck rolled in with everything I'd asked for. I set the speakerphone on the porch rail and dialed a number I hadn't used in months. County records. A cheerful voice answered. "County clerk's office. This is Bonnie speaking." "Hi Bonnie, Jack Mitchell here. I need to verify a deed real quick. I'm standing on my porch and someone's trying to sell it." She laughed. "Excuse me, what?" "I'm serious." "Oh Lord." "Okay, what's the parcel number?" "Echo Pines, Section C, Lot 42. There was a short pause, followed by rapid typing. Then Bonnie replied, "You're the registered owner of Lot 42. Mr. Michela, along with the lake and surrounding acreage, your trust holds everything from that lot up to Trailhead Hill, both sides of Lake Echo, and the hillside all the way to the main gate. Perfect, I said, and hit the speaker button so the couple could hear for themselves. Bonnie's voice echoed, Mr. Mitchell, is someone challenging your deed again? That word again hung in the air like a thunderclap. The man swallowed hard. We broken bar, we didn't know. Karen told USA Broken Bar. Karen says a lot of things, Buck muttered. Right on cue, a black SUV crunched up the gravel drive. Karen climbed out in stilettos far too impractical for the terrain and marched over like a thundercloud in a pantsuit. I was told this was a private showing, she snapped. I stepped forward. Karen, why are you listing my cabin for sale? Her chin lifted. Because your presence here constitutes a zoning violation. Echo Pines HOA Code 9.3, no unmonitored residential structures on recreational zones. This isn't your land, I said slowly. Karen folded her arms. The HOA is authorized to manage any unclaimed or disputed land within the Echo Pines perimeter. There's nothing disputed, I shot back. You saw the deed yesterday. You fainted reading it. Her face flushed. That wasn't from the deed, it was low blood sugar. Buck let out a belly laugh and nearly tipped his chair over. Karen, I said, keeping my voice even, I just confirmed with the county clerk, you're trying to sell property that doesn't belong to you. That's fraud. She turned to the couple. You two can leave. We'll follow up through the proper channels. They didn't argue. They nodded, awkwardly backed away, and left like they couldn't get out of there fast enough. You've crossed a line, I told her quietly. She narrowed her eyes. Then sue me. Buck stood. Careful what you wish for. His attorneys treat lawsuits like Sudoku. Karen whipped out her phone. You're leaving me no choice. Oh, what now? I asked. I'm filing a restraining order, she declared. For what? For harassment. You're harassing me on HOA property. This is my property, I said louder, pointing to the gravel beneath her high heels. You're standing on my land. Again, and this time, you brought strangers to tour it. She ignored me and began talking into her phone. Yes, I'd like to file an emergency injunction. I'm dealing with a hostile person interfering in HOA-sanctioned real estate matter. Before she could finish her sentence, a voice interrupted from behind. Karen. She turned. There stood Sheriff Caldwell. Big man, slow-spoken, smart, patient, maybe too patient. I heard there was trouble again, he said. Got a few calls saying you were trying to sell cabins you don't own. Karen's eyes darted like she was cornered. Sheriff, this is a simple misunderstanding. I stepped in. She's trying to sell my cabin, again. Caldwell stepped forward. Karen, yesterday I gave you a warning. Today we're moving into criminal territory. I am the HOA president, she said, her voice beginning to fray. And I'm the sheriff of this county, he replied calmly. And unless you've got a badge, you don't have the authority to sell someone else's land. She opened her mouth like she wanted to argue but then thought better of it. Smartest decision she'd made all day. He turned to me. Do you want to press charges? I looked at her. This woman had done everything in her power to embarrass me, steal from me, and force me off land that was rightfully mine. I thought it over for a moment, then said, not yet, but I do want a trespass order against her and the entire Echo Pines HOA. No one steps past this marker unless they have my written permission. The sheriff gave a firm nod. Consider it done. Karen's mouth dropped open. You can't do that. Buck handed him the map. Actually, yes he can. Her voice trembled. But we use those trails for morning walks, for fishing, for our summer barbecues, not anymore. I told her flatly. You should have thought about that before trying to sell land that wasn't yours. She stood there, motionless for a second, then spun around and stormed off. Her heels cracked against the gravel like fireworks. It felt like a conclusion, but it wasn't. A few days later, a government envelope showed up on my doorstep, legal documents inside. Karen had filed a formal complaint with the county zoning board and she was dragging me into court. The envelope felt heavy in my hands. County seal, certified delivery, the return address stamped with Office of Land Use and Zoning, Echo County. Rusty gave it one sniff, barked once, then wandered off like he wanted nothing to do with it. I carefully opened it. The first sentence hit me like a gut punch. Notice of pending zoning review petition for reclassification filed by Karen P., President, Echo Pines HOA. My jaw tightened as I read further. Karen hadn't backed down. She'd gone over the sheriff's head, bypassed the HOA entirely, and taken her crusade to the county. Her petition argued that my cabin and nearly 300 acres of surrounding land was improperly zoned. She claimed the area included historic structural concerns, and might be unsuitable for long-term living. In short, she was trying to get the whole property reclassified as protected conservation land. If she succeeded, I'd be barred from developing, leasing, or even using any part of it. She'd even attached a handwritten note. Mr. Mitchell's unwillingness to work with our community has created a hostile environment for Echo Pines residents. We request immediate reassessment and a cease and desist order on all cabin-related activity until this is formally resolved. My hands didn't shake from fear, they shook with anger. This wasn't about land use. This was a declaration of war. I called Buck. He showed up quickly, chewing sunflower seeds, carrying a portable printer like it was a shotgun. "She really went and filed this nonsense?" he asked, flipping through the documents. "Every word," I said. He scanned the pages, muttering, "She's trying to turn your land into some museum exhibit she can micromanage. That's bold even for her." I paced across the porch. "We need to fight back." "We will," he said. "But this isn't just a courtroom slap. She's playing the zoning game now." "That means politics." I nodded. I knew what that meant. This was going public. Soon after, I found myself sitting in a paneled office across from a stone-faced county commissioner. Buck was beside me, a thick folder stuffed with deeds, satellite maps, and permit approvals spread across the table. The commissioner tapped Karen's petition with a gold pen. "Mr. Mitchell, the HOA claims your cabin was never properly registered as a residence when you built it." I met his eyes. "That place has been my home since the first nail went in, fully permitted under the 2003 Rural Homesteading Ordinance." He flipped the page. "They also allege you allowed unauthorized development of protected wetlands." "Those trails they're talking about," Buck said, pointing to the map, "were built by hand with drainage planning and signed environmental clearance." "Got the documentation right here, 2012. See the seal? That came from your department." The commissioner gave a slow nod. "You do realize what they're doing, right?" I asked. "They can't control the land, so they're trying to freeze it, turn it into something unusable until I give up. And once I'm gone, they'll chip away at it bit by bit." He lowered his gaze. "You wouldn't be the first it's happened to," he admitted quietly. Not long after, Karen held a special HOA assembly. She stood in front of her followers like a preacher at a revival, waving papers and shouting about protecting the neighborhood's heritage. She claimed she was saving Echo Pines from rogue landowners who didn't respect the community. Someone recorded the whole thing. Within an hour, it was all over Facebook, then Reddit, then the local news. Echo Pines HOA president battles cabin owner over zoning dispute. Is the lake public or private? Suddenly, people started showing up at my gate. Reporters, curious neighbors, even hikers. One guy just wanted to fish. "This your lake?" he asked. "I just came to cast a line where all the drama is." It might have been fun if I wasn't staring down a zoning hearing that could lock up my land for years. Buck and I got to work. He printed every document we had, old receipts, letters from the former county clerk, permits, photos with date stamps, and even one of me holding the original sales contract in front of the cabin. Rusty still a puppy at my feet. But then something unexpected happened. People started taking my side. At first, it was the old-timers of folks who remembered the lake before it ever made it onto the maps. One of them, Miss Edna, even wrote a letter to the local paper. "Mr. Mitchell was here before the big houses and gold-plated mailboxes. We used to picnic on his land before there were even trails. The only thing Jack was guilty of was letting people enjoy what already belonged to him." Then came the flood of support of hikers, campers, scouts who'd used the trail for years as part of their annual summer trips. Letters and testimonies came pouring in, each one speaking to the cabin's good condition, the easy access to the land, and most of all, Jack's generosity. Meanwhile, Karen was getting dragged all over social media. Someone had uncovered the fake listing she'd created, complete with cash-only instructions, and dubbed it a textbook case of Karen behavior. Then a meme started circulating. It showed Karen holding a for sale sign over a cardboard box labeled Jack's Cabin. It exploded online overnight. But Karen wasn't retreating. The zoning board scheduled a hearing, official, formal, 2 weeks away. Jack would have a chance to speak, and so would Karen. Both parties could present witnesses, evidence, and legal counsel. Jack brought in his attorney, Janice Holt. She'd worked in land trusts and had a courtroom stare that could freeze fire. People called her the ice pick. Buck called her our nuke. 2 nights before the hearing, something strange happened. Jack was on his porch, sipping tea beneath the full moon, when he heard a rustle near the lake. Rusty growled low. Jack grabbed his flashlight and headed toward the dock. Kneeling at the water's edge was a woman with long gray hair and a blue flannel shirt, cradling something in her hands. As he approached, he saw it was a bundle of candles. She turned slightly. It was Morin. "Didn't mean to scare you," she whispered. "What are you doing out here?" Jack asked. She looked at the water, her voice soft. "I used to come here with my husband, a broken bar before he passed. This place kept him going during chemo. He'd fish for hours while I read nearby. It made us feel safe." Jack's chest tightened. "I never knew," he murmured. "She doesn't speak for all of us," Morin said, referring to Karen. "Some of us have just been afraid to stand up to her. She's cruel when threatened." Jack crouched beside her. "You think she's scared now?" Morin gave a faint, sad smile. "I think she's desperate." Then she reached into her coat and pulled out a folded envelope. "What's this?" he asked. "Something you'll want to see before the hearing," she replied. "It came through the HOA email last month. Karen deleted it from the logs, but I printed a copy just in case." Jack took the envelope, still unsure. Morin gently touched his shoulder. "Win this, Jack, not just for you, for all of us." And with that, she vanished into the trees. Back inside, Jack opened the envelope. Inside was a printed email from Karen. The subject line read, "If we can't control it, we freeze it." The message was short and damning. "Start zoning review immediately. If we lock it under conservation status, he'll lose the cabin. Then we sell off the lakefront to pay for the new community center. No one will miss one old man." Jack sank into a chair, hands trembling. This wasn't a miscommunication. It wasn't an honest policy mistake. It was premeditated theft, an orchestrated plan to take his land and flip it for profit. And now, he had proof. The hearing was in 48 hours, and Jack had never felt more prepared. The hearing room reeked of aging paper, stale coffee, and recycled air. Rows of metal chairs filled the room, occupied by curious residents, HOA board members, reporters, and some unfamiliar faces. Some whispered, others scrolled their phones. But all eyes were on Jack and Karina, waiting for the showdown that local news had dubbed the Battle for Echo Lake. Jack checked his tie one last time in the hallway mirror. Buck, looking oddly formal in a collared shirt, is something he hadn't worn in 15 years, leaned over and whispered, "You ready, General?" Jack gave a dry laugh. "As ready as I'll ever be." Janice walked ahead of him, calm and razor-focused in all black, clutching her briefcase. She rarely spoke unless it mattered, but the room went quiet in her presence. People instinctively stepped aside as she passed. She didn't command with volume, she ruled with silence. Karen, by contrast, made a theatrical entrance, dressed in a crisp white blazer, a red scarf, and sharp heels that echoed like gunfire on the floor. She was flanked by Derek and 2 other HOA board members. Their expressions were polished and unreadable. Karen surveyed the room like royalty. When her gaze landed on Jack, she gave a smug little smiley, like she thought the whole thing was already decided. Jack returned a single nod. She didn't know he had the email, the printed proof, tucked neatly in his folder, ready to expose the entire scheme. The commissioner called the meeting to order. Jack and Karen sat across from each other at separate tables. Up front, 3 zoning officials with nameplates and unreadable expressions sat beside the county clerk. Karen opened the proceedings. She stood confidently, voice crisp, launching into a flashy presentation packed with colorful charts, maps, and buzzwords like community harmony, environmental risk, and civic preservation. She showed photos of the cabin clearly taken from awkward angles to make it seem dilapidated. She claimed the structure was dangerous, that trail users had complained, and that Jack's continued presence on the property was obstructing HOA plans for public use. She even brought in a landscaper who declared the dock an eyesore. The crowd stirred uncomfortably. Janice didn't blink. When it was Jack's turn, Janice rose slowly, opened their binder, and began with one cool sentence: "You can't rezone what you never owned." She laid out the original deed, aerial imagery of the property, and Janice began by presenting environmental permits that had been approved by the same office more than 10 years ago. She followed that by revealing undeniable evidence of the fraudulent property listing Karen had created to sell my cabana, screenshots showing the ad, her phone number, and a bold cash-only note that drew shocked reactions from those watching. Then came the knockout punch. Janice pulled out Morin's envelope and handed a printed email to the board. "Here," she said calmly, "is a copy of an internal HOA message that was deleted from official records. In it, the HOA president explicitly outlines a plan to mislead the county into freezing Mr. Mitchell's property so it could be sold without his knowledge or approval." The room fell silent. Commissioner Reiner slowly lifted the page, adjusted his glasses, and read aloud with deliberate clarity. "Begin filing for zoning reclassification. Once we secure conservation status, he loses the cabin. Then we split off the lakefront to use those funds for the new community center. Nobody will miss one old man." A woman near the front gasped. Karen's face drained of color. Derek stared at her, speechless. From the back of the room, Morin gave me the smallest of nods. Reiner looked up. "Miss P, would you care to respond?" Karen rose, her voice wavering. "This is being misinterpreted. It was just a brainstorming session. Nothing definite." Janice tilted her head. "So you're acknowledging the email is authentic?" Karen hesitated, frozen in place. The room began to buzz like a hive waking up. Janice leaned back in her chair. "No further questions." The board huddled, whispering quietly. One member tapped the page repeatedly with a pen. Another shook his head. Finally, Reiner cleared his throat. "We'll take a short recess to review the material." As the board members filed into a side room, Karen strode over to me. She leaned in, her voice sharp and bitter. "You really think this ends here? I built that community. People respect me." I calmly sipped my water and looked her in the eyes. "You tried to steal everything I built. That's not what people respect." She narrowed her eyes. "You'll regret this." "I used to," I said quietly. "But not anymore." She spun around and stormed off. Buck shook his head. Someone better call an Uber for her pride. When the board returned, Reiner faced the room. After examining all submitted documents, hearing testimony, and reviewing supplemental communication, he began, "We find no evidence of zoning violations or improper land use by Mr. Mitchell. On the contrary, we've uncovered signs of intentional deception by the Echo Pines HOA." Karen twitched in her seat. Reiner went on, "Accordingly, the property in question will remain under private ownership and zoned as a rural homestead. Any future claims from the HOA will be rejected unless backed by a court ruling." Applause erupted across the room. I didn't cheer or move. I just breathed out slowly. 22 years of quiet living, 2 weeks of chaos. And now, finally, justice. Outside, reporters swarmed. Karen avoided the cameras entirely, barreling past them like they weren't there. Derek and the others lingered at a distance, clearly finished defending her. Just as I thought the storm had passed, Janice tapped me on the arm and held out her phone. "Take a look." I leaned in and read the headline on the screen. Echo Pines HOA under audit after cabin scandal. A anonymous tip leads to probe of years-long financial abuse. "They're digging through everything," Janice said. "From what I've heard, the audit team's already inside HOA headquarters." Buck let out a low whistle. "Well, a broken bar. Looks like the lake finally went quiet." He was wrong. Later that evening, just as I settled into my rocking chair with Rusty curled up at my feet, a black SUV rolled up the tree line. This time, it wasn't Karen. A man stepped out, followed by a camera crew and someone carrying a contract folder. "Mr. Mitchell?" he called. "I'm with Metal and Realty Productions. We're producing a new docuseries called HOA Hell. We'd like to feature your story." I stood, slowly. Rusty gave a single cautious bark. The man smiled. "And sir, if you're open to it, we believe your land would be the perfect setting for a series about rural justice and quiet living." I narrowed my eyes. "Are you saying you want to film a broken bar here?" He grinned. "If you're willing to lease it." I paused, then smiled, because when you finally push back against the wrong people, the right ones tends to show up. Rusty barked again twice, this time Mia watching the crew unload tripods and gear like they'd done it hundreds of times before. I stood there on the porch, one hand on the door handle, watching as it all unfolded, like I'd accidentally wandered into someone else's dream. "Just to be clear," I said, eyeing the crew, "you want to shoot a TV show here, on my land?" The man, tall, friendly, dressed in a Meadowland windbreaker, extended his hand. "Colin Baker, we're making HOA, a limited docuseries on the wildest HOA abuses across the country. Your story's gone viral and millions of views online. Our team's been chasing it for days." "I didn't agree to be in a show," I said. Colin chuckled. "You didn't need to, the internet did it for you." Then he handed me a leather folder. It was a detailed draft agreement to site access rights, payment structure, licensing details, everything laid out clearly. "Your cabin's gone viral," Colin said. "They're calling you the Echo Pines Cowboy now. There are memes of you holding a land deed like it's a shotgun." Buck, just back from checking the trails, leaned in to glance at the papers. "That's more than I earned building roads for 5 years, he said under his breath. "And that's per episode?" Colin nodded. "If it catches on, we're considering a spin-off, Land Wars, or maybe The Cabin King." Still brainstorming, my mind was spinning from everything that had happened at Karen's campaign, the court victory, the zoning reversal, and now this. "What about the HOA?" I asked. Colin gave a knowing smile. "Already contacted them. Their attorney tried to send a cease and desist, but it won't hold. Public records, open land use discussions, that they've got no legal standing. Plus, the audit's already making them sweat." He leaned closer. "Karen's under investigation for misusing HOA funds, personal vacations, Aspen trips, first-class airfare. She even bought a massage chair and tried to write it off as community wellness gear." I raised a brow. "She's falling apart," Colin added. "And you stood your ground." "That's the story we want to share." I took a deep breath, staring out at the lake. I never chased fame. I just wanted still mornings with birdsong, quiet evenings with a cup of tea. But if telling my story could help others, people quietly being bullied by folks like Karina, maybe all the chaos served a purpose. I nodded. "One condition," I said. Colin leaned forward. "Name it." "I want the first episode titled, 'You Called the Cops on Me, but I Owned the Road You Drove on.'" He laughed and snapped his fingers at his assistant. "Done." That evening, the crew got to work. Battery-powered lights and drones captured sweeping shots from the trees. They filmed the trailheads, the dock, even Buck adjusting a loose step on the porch. Rusty, naturally, got more screen time than anyone, but not everyone was in a celebratory mood. Just as the final camera shut down and the sun dipped below the horizon, headlights appeared at the edge of the property. A familiar black SUV. Karen stepped out at this time alone. No clipboard, no backup, just an old gray cardigan and sunglasses she didn't need in the dark. She looked hollow. "What now, Karen?" I asked as I stepped toward her. "I thought court settled everything." She silently held out a white envelope. I didn't take it. "What's that?" Her voice broke slightly. "My resignation." Buck came up beside me, arms folded. "Little late for regrets." "I'm not here to say sorry," she mumbled. "I came because I've lost it all." That got my attention. She looked me in the eye. "The audit froze all HOA funds. They tracked personal spending as spa memberships, home upgrades. They're talking charges now. Fraud, embezzlement." I stayed quiet. "The board turned on me," she said. "Derek quit. Moran's acting president now." She disabled my gate code, had security escort me out of the clubhouse. Buck let out a low chuckle. "Poetic justice." Karen's eyes were rimmed red. "I just came to see you win." I shook my head. "It was never about winning." "Well, you've got the cameras, the press, public sympathy. I've got subpoenas, lawyers, and a future filled with concrete walls and jail uniforms." She turned to go, then paused. "I was wrong," she said quietly. "You were kind. You let people use the trails, fish the lake. You didn't have to, but I tried to twist kindness into control." Without another word, she left. I didn't stop her. Next morning, the media was buzzing again. The headline read, "HOA Karen resigns after landowner uncovers fraud." Echo Pines elects new board. The photo showed me on my porch in a rocking chair, coffee in hand, Rusty on my lap. Colin called later that day. The episode's blowing up. You're a hit, Jack. The networks want more. I asked him to hold off. I needed time to think. So, I went down to the lake, let Rusty play in the shallows, and sat on the dock. That's when Maureen appeared. Approaching slowly. May I? She asked. I nodded, and she sat beside me. Just wanted to thank you, she said, for not giving up, for being kind, even when we didn't deserve it. Thank you for listening, I replied. She smiled. The board voted today. We're officially returning all trail access to you. Echo Pines will treat it as a privilege, not a right. You set the terms. We'll follow them. That meant more to me than any headline ever could. As the sun set and the lake turned gold, I thought back to when Karen first showed up on my porch, clipboard in hand. We'd come a long way. Just as I was beginning to feel peace settle back in, Buck came running down the hill with his phone. You're not going to believe this, he said, breathless. What now? He held up the screen. Another letter. This one from a national real estate company. We'd like to purchase your property for a luxury lake villa project. Offer, $12.4 million. Please advise. I blinked, then laughed so hard I nearly toppled into the lake. After everything of the conflict, the trespassing, the zoning battle, as if they wanted to buy what they couldn't take. But they'd overlooked one thing. I wasn't just defending land. I told them I was defending peace, and peace isn't something you can put a price on. I stared at the offer on Buck's phone until my eyes went dry. $12.4 million. The number didn't seem real, like it had come from another universe entirely. Luxury lakefront villas, they said. A master-planned community with retail shops, a modern wellness lodge, and full lake access. They even sent over concept renderings, sleek glass towers replacing the pines, a boardwalk where deer once tread softly at dawn. Buck gave a low whistle. That's more than the town's yearly budget. Rusty growled low beside me, like even he could sense something was off. I let out a long breath. They want to erase everything. Yep, Buck said. Turn this place into a spa resort. Did they already forget what happened to the last group that tried pulling something like this? Buck grinned. Guess they skipped that part of the docu-series. I looked back at the cabin. The porch light still flickered. The screen door gave that same familiar squeak. The dock was a little bent, and the trails needed fresh gravel. But this was home. My piece, my history, my little piece of the world, perfect in its imperfection. It didn't need glamour or profit. I handed the phone back. Tell them no thanks. Buck nodded. Knew you would. Later that day, Maureen came by again, this time holding a basket of blueberry muffins and the final paperwork. We've officially revised the HOA charter, she said with a smile. Your land, your rules. No member, board, or officer can claim oversight, access, or ownership unless you provide it in writing. She passed me a copy, already signed by the new board. I studied her for a moment. Feels like this place is finally healing. She let out a breath. People were afraid of her, Jack. I was, too, but you stood your ground. And now folks are starting to remember what it means to live in a neighborhood and not be controlled by one. We sat on the front porch, sipping tea while Rusty dozed nearby. Ever think of leaving? She asked quietly. Now that all this is behind you? Now and then, I admitted. But then the wind carries that scent of pine off the lake, a broken bar, or the frogs start up at night, a broken bar, and I remember why I built this place. She nodded. I didn't need high-rises or million-dollar buyouts. I just needed room to breathe. That evening, the film crew returned to record a final interview. Colin stood in front of the camera, mic-clipped to his shirt. We're rolling in 3A broken bar 2A broken bar 1. He looked at me. Jack, after everything, what would you say to others facing similar fights? I thought it over before answering slowly. Don't let the loudest voices rewrite your truth. If you have something, a land, peace, dignity, protect it like your life depends on it. Because when you give in to people like Karen, they won't stop at your property line. They'll come for your soul. Colin blinked. That's powerful. I gave a small smile. It's honest. That final episode aired shortly after and racked up over 6 million views in just a couple of days. Thousands of messages poured in from across the country, some from people fighting their own HOA wars, others just cheering for the old guy in the woods who said no when it mattered. I received letters, emails, even care packages. One woman sent a hand-carved wooden sign that read, "The man who owned the county." I hung it over the fireplace. Just as things were settling down, a formal invitation arrived in the mail, cream-colored paper, gold trim. "You are cordially invited to the Echo County Property Owners Gala, honoring distinguished land stewardship." Scrawled at the bottom was a note, "Keynote speaker A. Jack Mitchell." I nearly spilled my tea. "I'm giving speeches now?" I muttered. Buck laughed so hard he cried. Rusty thumped his tail like he approved. But the most unexpected part came next. At the gala, me in a borrowed suit, surrounded by names I'd only ever seen on mailboxes, I was handed a glass plaque, "Lifetime Guardian of Echo County." Then the county commissioner stepped forward and made an announcement. "We're proud to rename the trail around Lake Echo in honor of the man who reminded us all what ownership truly means. From this day forward, it will be known as the Jack Mitchell Trail." Applause echoed through the hall. Cameras flashed. Then, from the back of the room, someone called out, "Where's Karen now?" A wave of laughter rippled through the crowd. The truth? Karen had left Echo Pines entirely. Word was she'd joined another HOA across the state. But the internet has a long memory. Her face had become a meme, a warning, a headline that followed her wherever she went. Maybe that was justice. But I didn't celebrate her downfall. I celebrated the peace I'd fought for. Because in the end, I didn't win by yelling or scheming. I won by staying, by digging my heels into the truth, by remembering that the best revenge isn't vengeance, it's living well. Now, every morning, I wake up to birdsong at the window. Rusty stretches out by the fire. I sip my tea in the same chair where it all began. Karen once called the cops on me for refusing to leave. She didn't realize then I owned the whole county. But now, everybody knows.